You are listening to WCAT Radio, your station for quality Catholic programming. Your selected program will begin right after a word from our sponsor, GroupM7.com, a web design and hosting company. Log on to GroupM7.com today and let them know that WCAT Radio sent you.
You know, my finest childhood memories was the Saturday morning movies. For about 4 bits each, my brother and I could split a Coke and a big box of popcorn and watch movies about Tarzan, Jane, and their Amazon River adventures. Well, maybe that's where Jeff Bezos took his name. His Amazon.com is now the largest online retailer in the world. I'm Michael Mahfood with Group M7, the oldest and largest website design firm in East Texas. And here's my point, and as usual, it's a good one. If your website is modern and up-to-date, mobile and search engine friendly, it matters not whether you sell a product or provide information about your goods and services, your sales justifiably will increase just like theirs. The world uses the internet. We can improve your website and your email. Look at our giant portfolio at GroupM7.com. Since 1995, there's only one web and there's only one group, and it's us. It's Group M7.
You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hi, everybody. This is Dr. Cynthia Toolin-Wilson, and this is my show, Author to Author. Tonight, for our guest, we have Dr. Peter Redpath. We've worked together for years at Holy Apostles, and he has a new book called How to Listen and How to Speak. Standing on the shoulders of giants to renew common sense and uncommon sense wisdom in the contemporary world. Hi, Peter. How are you tonight?
Very well, Dr. Toolin. Nice to talk to you again.
Yes, it is. Mm-hmm. So, do you prefer I call you Dr. Redpath, or is Peter okay?
Peter's fine. I'll call you Cynthia if you'd like.
That's right. That's fine. Okay. Would you like to start us with a prayer?
Surely. One I used to do on campus all of the time that we call the Prayer of St. Thomas. Name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit, amen. Direct, we beseech thee, O Lord, our actions by thy holy inspiration, and carry them on by thy gracious assistance, that every prayer and work of ours might begin always with thee, and be happily ended. Through thee be happily ended, through Christ our Lord, amen.
Amen. Excuse me. So, tell me what got you interested in writing this book.
The progressive collapse of Western civilization was the remote cause. I started working on a project in the 1980s after reading a work by one of Jacques Maritain's last works, The Peasant of the Garonne. I was vice president of the American Maritime Association at the time, and organizing a lot of conferences. I organized conferences for them internationally for about 10 years. Mm-hmm. And in this work, Maritain had begged his readers not to think that the claim he was going to make was that of a crazy old man when he maintained that modern subjective idealism, which is the intellectual movement that starts with Descartes and then from which the Enlightenment grows, and modern philosophy, and what some people falsely refer to as postmodern philosophy, as my friend John Dealey would say. It's not a bit different than modern, just on steroids. He said that it wasn't philosophy. And I have a lot of respect for Maritain. I still do, although I disagree with him about a lot of things. And I always respect what he has to say and question whether or not what I'm saying is correct if he disagrees with it. So I took a look at this. I had to do a history of philosophy in order to do it. I started out in the 1980s, early 1980s, working on this, and then started to write a history of philosophy, because I was convinced Maritain was right, that the modern philosophy was basically not philosophy, and neither was mostly everything that had been been written related to philosophy, strictly speaking, in the West before the decline of ancient Greece. The ancient Greeks had lost their understanding of what philosophy was, and what they passed on to what was passed on in early Christianity to the West largely. There are exceptions like the Neoplatonism, Neoplatonic movement. Still retained large elements of understanding of what classical philosophy was, but much of it had been lost. And Maritain had claimed that this break that occurred in the 17th century with this misunderstanding of the nature of philosophy, if that could not be, he called it a separation. If that separation could not be resolved, then the West and the world would not be able to see future peace. Future world peace would be impossible. And so I was trying to figure out, well, how do you do this? How do you reunite? What he said was a divorce between science and wisdom, which was related to this break, this misunderstanding of the nature of philosophy, because classically philosophy and science were identical up until the beginning of the 20th century. They were popularly understood. When Sir Isaac Newton writes his great work on the Principia Mathematica, he calls that a work in natural philosophy. He understood that he was working in he considered him to be part of that classical philosophical tradition, so I thought that the only way that you can possibly reunite science and wisdom, and you're talking about science meaning this reductionistic notion that it's mathematical physics in the 20th century and 21st century. The only way you can do that is by reuniting philosophy and science, by showing how philosophy and science are actually identical. And the attempt to divorce the two of them and to maintain that they are somehow different than the whole of science is mathematical physics, like it's often assumed today, is simply false. It's a ridiculous notion. In 2014, I had the opportunity in 2010 to retire from St. John's and to devote myself to doing more research on this. And I started, a couple of years after that, I started to do conferences. And it's about the same time I got involved with Holy Apostles in Huntington, Long Island, on common sense and renewing common sense as a way of renewing philosophy, another proper understanding of philosophy and science, and achieving global peace. So that's the short story of how I got to where I was. And in between here is the character of Mortimer Adler, because I had written a book many years ago called How to Read a Difficult Book. I did this when I was teaching at St. John's University, and I was prompted to do that because when I started to teach there, I had to switch jobs from a university in Pennsylvania where I had tenure, and I had to get tenure once again, but in the 3 years at St. John's. I had to teach both at St. John's and in Pennsylvania simultaneously for a semester. Wow. And I got very sick as a result of it. I couldn't, came down with something similar, I think, to walking pneumonia. I couldn't lecture. And I changed my teaching style. Instead of trying to lecture to students, which I had been doing out in Pennsylvania, which wasn't very effective because the students were dismal. When I started at St. John's, I was from Brooklyn and from the New York City area, and I was at the Staten Island campus. But when I was an undergraduate, it was common for students in New York and Brooklyn and so forth, not to buy books even, much less read them, but pretend they did. When I started, the only way I could teach was have people read sections from Plato. I decided, well, I'll get Plato's dialogues, and I'll start to have the students read passages from Plato's dialogues. And I found out that they couldn't even sound out the words correctly.
Oh, dear.
And this was at a time when administrators were very concerned about student retention, and they were looking at problems as to why they couldn't retain students, and what they could do, and they came up with one solution after the other, such as they had to teach grammar, and they had to get somebody from the English department to deal with the students' writing and reading ability, and these people couldn't figure out what the problem was, much less solve it. The problem was, as I understood, that students didn't like books. For one thing, they didn't understand the nature of books. I would put a book in front of the students in class and try to get them to read something, just a short passage, maybe for 5 minutes, and you could see the pain, And no, that's it. This was like it was like reading. It was like I put a set of oracles in front of them. I'd ask them, well, can you tell me what that says? What do the passages say? And they tell me, well, I feel. And I said, no, I'm not interested in your emotional reaction to it. I said, what does it say? What is it saying? What does it mean? What would somebody in the audience in ancient Greece, when listening to this, understand this author to be saying? They have no idea. And this wasn't their problem, okay? They the administrators didn't know how to solve it because they'd never been educated in the method for solving it either. And I said, well, I gotta get a hold of a book to help me with this. And I found Adler's I was familiar with it, how to read a book. And I started to use that to take those techniques in class, but they didn't work. Either. Adler said that there are 3 different goals for which you read. One is for pleasure, enjoyment. The other is for information, which is profitable to your intellect. And the other is for some sort of intellectual perfection. For understanding. But what he didn't do was focus attention on what I saw the students were missing. The students couldn't follow the arguments that were being made in the work because they didn't understand. They had to listen for definitions.
Oh, boy.
And so I wrote a book on how to read a difficult book, criticizing in part Adler's how to read a book. And Adler's Center for the Study of the Great Ideas got a copy of the book and contacted me about it, and they started to sell it among their own membership. And then I came across that was the early edition I had worked with at Adler, the 1940 book that he had. It was really very caustic and very. It had no fat in it, as to what I considered to be problems, that in education. Even though he didn't have the precise understanding of what he had to do to fix it, but gradually he did, and he did that. The later versions of that work, which has been in print since 1940, were edited by Charles Van Doren, who also came out of that Columbia University Great Books program, but more out of the literary side. There was a there was a group that focused attention on philosophy more or less from the standpoint of logic, like Adler did, and then Van Doren, who did it from a literary standpoint. That tended to improve Adler's understanding in some way about the need for listening. Right? And one reason Adler didn't understand precisely how to solve these problems that he saw needed to be solved was precisely because when he was a young student at Columbia University, he had conflated philosophy and logic. He had reduced philosophy to logic, and he didn't think that truth existed in anything but logic, and he was extremely obnoxious and antisocial. He just couldn't get along with people. He wanted more than anything else to become a professor of philosophy at Columbia University, and he was extremely talented. He hadn't graduated high school when he got accepted into Columbia, even though he hadn't graduated high school. He never got a degree from Columbia College because he refused to take the swimming exam that was required, but got accepted into Columbia Graduate School. But he was such a pain in the neck as a student that they wouldn't admit him into the philosophy department. He had to study psychology, after he got a degree in psychology, he recognized that philosophy as a discipline could not gain respect in modernity unless it was practiced much like a social science discipline and in the form of a team effort. And he realized when he was coming to this discovery that this is actually the way the ancient Greeks had done it. It took him a while to see this, and he actually started to see it when he became introduced to the teachings of Aristotle and St. Thomas Aquinas, when he was doing some lectures, and a priest had invited him. I think it was in Detroit. He was at a synagogue, and he had given a talk, and this priest had told him he should talk to his students, the Jesuit priest students, because Adler was a pagan, basically. But he started to recognize that philosophy had to be done historically in terms of a tradition, and you had to be able to transmit that tradition from one generation to the next. And the people at Columbia had recognized this. John Dewey, who was not, I don't think, an exceptionally great thinker from the metaphysical standpoint, was a very nice person, a human being, very sociable, and he understood this what during the Middle Ages they would have called scholasticism, the scholastic aspect, which is also sometimes historically, going back to antiquity, referred to the humanities, the humanistic approach. That term becomes revived after the Italian Renaissance, and philosophy becomes identified with humanities. The term becomes popular in the 18th century, but it's really with Boethius that he's called the last of the ancients and the first of the scholastics, popularly. But that's not true either, because he's just continuing what the ancient Greeks had done. The ancient Greeks had practiced philosophy as a psychological habit of learning that involved passing on a tradition as part of school, and the loss of that tradition brings with it a an ability, I found out from doing this research, of common sense wisdom. When Descartes had started his revolution in philosophy in 1641 by bringing his work on the Meditations on First Philosophy to the dean of the School of Theology and the faculty in theology at the University of Paris. He considered himself to be doing this work to bring the period of time out of skepticism. This period of time was very similar to our own, right, where as a result of the misunderstanding of the nature of philosophy as it was practiced during the Renaissance, the Italian Renaissance, by the tail end of the Italian Renaissance, Europe was filled with superstition, magic, superstition, and a mixture, a loss of identity of different disciplines and how they could distinguish one from the other. And they were constantly being mixed together, so people really couldn't precisely identify what they were doing and explain precisely how they were doing it. But the popular understanding of philosophy at this time was that philosophy was a hidden teaching that had been esoterically transmitted from this is real philosophy. True philosophy was supposed to be an esoteric transmission of a hidden metaphysical and/or moral teaching that had begun with the Jews and had been esoterically transmitted both through the Kabbalah and the poetry, the classical poets, especially Homer and Hesiod and Aeneid, the Aeneas, Virgil. And only the poets had the ability to read this secret philosophy. This was an attempt on the part of starting with Petrarch, of Renaissance humanists, to elevate the status of their discipline and read pagan writers. And they had the lowest of the for the majority of the time of the Middle Ages, philosophy was identified either with the trivium, right, of the whole trivium, or with grammar, rhetoric, and logic. Right? With the revival of the Carolingian Renaissance, it was first tended to be identified with grammar, right? Restoring literacy, right? The 8th and 9th centuries. Then with logic, Peter Abelard. Right? The tail end of that revival by around the 11th and 12th centuries, when the writings of Aristotle start to come back into the West, rhetoric, in which poetry is taught, it starts to become elevated in status. But that's short-circuited by the scholastic Renaissance that is coming in from the Arabs, the Arab schools of translation in places like Sicily and in Spain, you have some condemnations that go on in the 13th century, 1274, 1277, and where the scholastic revival is basically cut off at the knees, and the members of this School of Liberal Arts at the University of Paris, where rhetoric is starting to come into the fore. They exit and they go over to Italy, and you have the Constantinople, the decline of Constantinople, and you have people coming over from Greek scholars coming over to begin this renaissance for philosophical movement, and they tried to and with it the teachings of Plato as a revival, as a rival to that of Aristotle. Marsilio Ficino, for example, the Platonic school of Ficino, that could become a heavy influence on Cambridge, right? and the Cambridge Platonists, for instance, right? That they maintain that to elevate the status of poetry, that philosophy is a kind of reading, and it requires it comes through inspiration, just like the ancient poets claimed that they possess true science because they were inspired by the gods. Right? And so you had this battle of the arts going back over and over again, over centuries. When Galileo comes on at the tail end of the Renaissance and he says the book of nature is written in the language of mathematics, right? He's saying that only the mathematicians now. You see, you're moving the trivium to the quadrivium. Right? Yeah. The whole of truth lies in science, right? But science is hidden teaching, but only the mathematician knows how to read it. Right? And so the mathematician is working in modern physics. So now the whole of science is reduced to that. During part of the Middle Ages, with the movement of the Islamic influence on the West, you have Averroes saying that the whole of teaching, the whole of truth lies in Islam, in the Quran, but only Aristotle knows how to read the Quran. You've got to be an Aristotelian philosopher.
Oh boy!
Bogus claims that historically, anybody that reads the history of philosophy thoroughly, and 99% of people who are engaged in the subject don't do this. You don't see this. You don't see this common trend where people involved in the discipline they have their narrow specialization. There's a common understanding that there's reductionism in philosophy that goes on over and over and over again, but the historical movement of it and how common it is and how it wrecks, it ruins the ability for people to be able to communicate properly is lost because as St. Thomas says, the whole of the science is contained in its definitions. And the whole of the science is contained in its first principles, and the first principles are contained in its definitions. So if you're not paying attention to how people are using definitions, right, you can't understand precisely what people are talking about. And if you can't understand precisely what you're talking about when you're communicating with other people, you're not on the same page, we'd say today, right? And you can't you can't engage in profitable conversation. Adler saw this, right? And whenever Adler is analyzing a philosophical problem, he's analyzing it as a psychologist. I saw this in his work. He from reading Aristotle, especially Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, he saw this. That Aristotle was chiefly a psychologist in doing philosophy. He was transferring. Father was was the court physician to Philip of Macedon, and a terrific physician. And Socrates considered himself to be a philosopher of the soul, to be a doctor of the soul, a physician of the soul. Aristotle is of the same psychological mindset. Aristotle, I claim, and St. Thomas, they're both organizational psychologists, and the whole of philosophy is actually organizational psychology. If you don't see that in what in what they're doing, you can't understand how they're defining their subject matter. What caused me to understand this as I was reading Aristotle was a statement that Gilson, the great historian of philosophy, Etienne Gilson, said many years ago that most philosophical mistakes start from badly framed questions. And I thought that was right for years. I thought, I think that's true. That sounded very, right on the money to me. And when I was reading Adler for a while, after a while, I realized, no, that's not correct. And Gilson himself had spent decades trying to explain the nature of Christian philosophy from the 1930s up until the time he died, which was I forget the exact year, but toward the end of the 20th century, and he never succeeded in doing it. And I realized that the reason he was wrong about this because the most philosophical mistakes, as well as most mistakes in conversation, ordinary conversation, people have, is that they don't precisely know what they're talking about. You don't know the subject. You think you do, and you think you're in agreement with somebody else about the subject. All right? And if you're not talking about the same thing, you can't ask the right questions. Because questions are only asked in a profitable way where you can make advances solving problems to the extent that you're talking about the same subject. You don't, either to yourself, you don't change your subject. You're talking about this subject, you don't change it to some other subject, right? And you talk about it in the same way, right? If you don't do that, you can't engage in profitable conversation. The conversation gets nowhere. It tends to go around in a circle. Right? I saw this as a common characteristic of friends of mine that I refer to as people that were open. Encyclopedias open to the wrong page. They knew a tremendous amount of stuff, but they couldn't apply it commonsensically. They didn't know, at what time to use this, and in what way. And this idea of understanding precisely what you're talking about led me to understand that we're always, whenever we're talking about some subject and we're wondering about it in one way or another, what we're attempting to do is to understand the way the parts of some whole are put together to cause some kind of action, an organizational action. If we can agree about precisely what we're talking about, then we can focus attention on what parts belong to that organization and what causes it to operate in the same way. Now, that's not what logicians do. Logicians, when they talk about their subject, but they try to find out, they think about it abstractly, and they don't think about it historically. They abstract from time and place, and they come up with a universal definition in the sense that it's some concept that they're abstractly considering and referring to a multitude of species, right, or species to individuals, and they call it universal. They come up with some sort of universal concept or universal idea. But what Adler was doing when he was doing philosophy, constantly focusing attention on organizations and the way they operate. And Gilson was the same thing when he was doing his historical research. He had. Are you still there, Cynthia?
Yes.
Oh, because I had a beep. I was wondering whether I got cut off. Gilson was always using history as a test for whether or not a person's philosophy was true. He called it philosophical experience, and he wrote this great book, one of his great books on the unity of philosophical experience, and how people define their subject in some way, and then when they try to apply their definitions to reality, they find that they don't work. And I make a simple analogy with respect to that, and how this is related to what I've been talking about regarding being on the same page, making sure that you're talking about the same subject, the same genus or species, right? Doing it in the same way. Anybody who has common sense related to engineering knows that while you have to use language to communicate your engineering principles, the principles of grammar and punctuation are not the principles of engineering. You cannot apply them, right, and think that that's all you need to do. Be grammatically correct, and that what you're going to do is promote. You're going to be able to build a bridge, right, that is actually going to have the unity, this organizational unity of being a bridge, right, and perform the operation the bridge does, and perform in being able to hold up that, it's different parts, right, in a unified way. Right? So Aristotle, when he does philosophy, he always does it by defining the subject matter, right? And he puts the subject he's talking about into a genus. This is his common sense way of proceeding, right? Because he realizes he has to understand the organizational whole with which he's dealing, right? And then the unique action that it performs on the basis of the way those parts of that whole are harmonized. So I say the whole of an organization or the whole of a genus exists in the unity of its parts, right? And the harmony. And what anybody who's engaged in scientific thinking is engaged in is the psychological habit of wondering about what is this peculiar unity with which I'm dealing, this organizational whole, and what are the parts? Qualitatively, what type of parts exist in it? And how can they be united, harmonized together to generate that action? That's universal to everybody who's got a scientific or artistic mindset, right? And that's chiefly the habit of science, which is identical with the habit of wondering. Philosophy, according to Aristotle, and philosophy, according to Plato, don't start with faith-seeking understanding. They don't start with universal methodic doubt, right? They don't start with the universal spirit of Hegel, seeking to emerge into universal science, or Rousseau's urge to emerge, backward emotions into enlightened emotions. None of that. Huh? They start with the psychological activity of wondering about the behavior of some subject. And understanding the causes that are involved. And they start with understanding, some sort of understanding. Right? Now, philosophy starts with Descartes, with universal methodic doubt, not with understanding. You got to prove your first principles, which is totally absurd. First principles are what you know best. You start with what you understand you're talking about. You can't reason it. You can't prove your first principles. Why? Because they're evidently true. No science does this. Today we call them assumptions. Well, we start with assumptions. Okay. Well, what do you assume? What do you mean by assumption? It's what I mean by generally common sense. Common sense we use analogously. It's like St. Augustine says in the Confessions, if somebody asks him what time is he doesn't know. If nobody asks him, he knows. As soon as somebody says he can't tell them. He can't give them a definition. Right? And the reason he can't give them a definition is because he understands something that is so familiar, right? That it has to be accepted in order for you to define something else. Or it can only be defined negatively, right? Through some sort of relations that you can make to something else, from an effect to a cause. The philosophy understood in this way, as identify with science, becomes a psychological habit of wondering. And you can find the specific difference among the different habits of wondering precisely in the habits of wondering. Right? For example, a biologist and a medical doctor are both wondering about a human heart, and the biologist is wondering about the human heart with respect to it being life-generating, and the medical doctor is wondering about it health-generating. Are there health problems with this?
Right.
And if the health problems exist, they exist in relationship of the parts. That there's some sort of disorder, right? And that you arrive at through an induction. You immediately grasp it. Right? So in fact, this is a major problem that people in logic have. They tend to think that induction is some sort of a logical activity that arises from examining a multitude of particulars and then jumping to a universal conclusion. And that's not true at all. Sometimes you don't even have to do that. You're so familiar with the subject, right, that you immediately see, the unity that exists in a part. In the parts of something, a person who's an expert, right, in dealing with a particular subject of study, and walks on into a place where this activity is occurring, immediately can apprehend whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy, that there's something right going on or something wrong going on. St. Thomas attributes that and getting this from Aristotle, to a faculty in human beings that he calls particular reason or cogitative reason. And he locates common sense in this faculty. And not only common sense in general as having synesis, which is the opposite of being asinine, asynesis, and is analogous to instinct in animals, where he talks about how the sheep will run away from the wolf instinctively, right? And will not do that because it's somehow bigoted. It dislikes round-colored animals. Right? It really is that it hates this is going to eat me, and so it immediately takes off. And human beings have that same ability on the sense level in relationship to two emotions, especially hope and fear. And he locates those emotions in a faculty that results. Well, they're located in what he calls this irascible appetite, but that kicks in only to the extent that you are in touch with sense reality. Right? To the extent that, in other words, you sense real good and real evil related to human beings. Yeah, you do. When people, for example, are physically ill, and you've had this experience, I've had this experience, it's hard not to know that you're physically ill. You don't have to reason this out.
You're right. You know, right away.
You immediately know it. And somebody said to you, can you prove that to me? Prove it. Prove it to me. And you say, what are you, an idiot? You don't prove what's evident, You want me to throw up on you? What do you want me to do?
Oh, my. That's good.
But poor Descartes, he thinks that the whole of truth lies in this system of philosophy, which is logic. It's a logical system, but it's not historically buried in esoteric teachings. God gave it to him and put it in its soul.
Yeah.
As a solitary individual with a stronger will than anybody else, because he's got this pure will, like being a member of the elect, he can apprehend this, but he's got to prove it. Right? So we're in the situation in the 21st century here, where people think that the only way you can prove anything to anybody else, if at all, is by some sort of logic, and the logic doesn't even have to be in touch with reality. It's just kind of these people. It doesn't even have to have any logical consistency from the standpoint of an Aristotelian type of logic. It doesn't. It's just common agreement or common feelings that we all say that this is the way it is, and this is common sense. Gilson once said, philosophy always buries its undertakers. And I said, well, that's true if your philosophy is not nuts. If what you're calling philosophy is burying undertakers, it's only doing so because it's in touch with reality, with the natures of things. Because whenever we're talking about anything, we're locating it within some sort of an organizational whole. Right? And we're apprehending how the parts of that whole are unified to produce the action that's producing. Right? And we have commonly in the West and globally lost our understanding of that. We think we have to start by proving first principles. And we're totally at a loss about how to use this tunnel vision that has been superimposed on our psyches to achieve what Adler calls a meeting of minds with other individuals. And I say, well, that's not really a good way to talk about it. It's really a meeting of understandings. You have to understand what you're talking about. Even if you want to criticize me, you have to understand what you're talking about.
Right.
To maintain you doing that. So when we're talking about common understanding, common sense, we're simply talking about common understanding. And most of us have very little common sense with respect to most things. But when we do have common sense, we're talking about us having the same sort of understanding related to this subject over here, and the way it operates. And Adler thought the only way you could get to that was by means of abstract logic. And when he was young, matters of truth. And he divided the world into matters of truth and matters of taste. So anybody who wasn't a logician belonged to that, like John Dewey, they belonged to that realm of matters of taste. Right? And then as he got older, he started to realize, well, actually, there's a whole massive realm of subjects that we don't apprehend by abstract logic. We can never apprehend them by syllogistic logic. And if you think you can take that approach, you're going to wind up being out of touch with reality. Usually people who have that kind of mindset work in middle management somewhere for major corporations.
Oh boy. God save us from the middle managers. Anyway.
So that's why I wrote this, Listen How to Speak, because Adler says, well, the first thing you got to do is you got to be able to listen, in order to be able to develop a habit of conversational speech, and being able to get a habit of good conversation by means of which you can talk about the same subjects in more or less the same way with other people to acquire mutual understanding, totally or partially, is crucial to being able to maintain peaceful coexistence. If you don't have that, you have one-way talk. He divides it into one-way talk and two-way talk. And he says that one-way talk is the way we talk to children. And where a person really doesn't know the rudimentary principles, the first principles. When the principles of common sense are really the first principles of understanding, evident truths that everybody knows that don't have to be proved, that don't have to be proven. Now, some of these are just abstract kinds of truth. Like that a whole is greater than any of its parts, right? But some of them are practical and productive truths related to you can't hope for the impossible, for example. And if nothing is really good and nothing can improve you in any way, then to hope for anything is really hopeless. And the whole emotion of hope would put you out of touch with reality. And although that's evidently false. And it's false to anybody that has experience at living. The psychological experience of the reality of this emotion. Same thing with fear. Right? If nothing can hurt you, really, because there are no goods and no evils. Nothing is really good. Nothing is really bad. And the only way that there can be real goods and real evils if some things are more perfect than others. Because the good is what it helps to improve you, make you more perfect. So to accept the reality of hope and fear, you got to accept the reality of good and evil and perfection and imperfection. Right? And you have to accept those before you engage in any kind of conversation related to reality. These are evident truths. I don't think anybody can refute them.
It's interesting.
And once we cut ourselves off from this tradition it's funny. Adler starts this work, his work called "How to Speak and How to Listen," defending rhetoric. Where as a young person, he thought that anybody that was involved in rhetoric was dealing with matters of taste, and there could be no truth in it. He maintains that this activity, this habit, this liberal art of rhetoric is crucial for conveying docilitas, the medieval this virtue that during the Middle Ages was identified with teachability. And St. Thomas says that it consists in conveying prudence. And inculcating prudence in students. So, what happens with modern thought by individualizing it more or less and saying that it has no need for history at all and tradition. And passing on the wisdom of one generation to the next, because all science started in the 17th century, and everything prior to that was backward. Right?
Oh, dear.
Since it all started with the Jews, they got to be responsible for all this. That's the logical implication, by the way, of all this. That's why you have the rise of anti-Semitism today, wherever the Enlightenment mindset tends to dominate. And it dominates in all of our cultural institutions, especially the educational ones, and in the media. Now that is something rotten with the principles that a person is using. Somebody like Descartes was not an anti-Semite, but if you take his principles and you try to apply them consistently, you're going to develop educational institutions. If you think that philosophy is a hidden teaching that has been false all previously to you, and that the popular notion of it, was that it was this esoteric teaching, even though you've buried it in your soul now and not in history, still it's in the same location. Inadvertently, what you're doing is you're passing on to future generations a culture of anti-Semitism, as well as anti-Catholicism.
Mm. Well, there's plenty of that going around right now, so that says something.
Yeah, now this is endemic to your principles, and you can't get around that by just making this slight shift. You have to change your whole educational philosophy, your whole understanding of the human person, right? And what's involved in a philosophy of education.
Yeah.
Which is contained in this book on how to listen and how to speak, where I maintain that I'm analogously in doing this as the first ever publication of the Warrenecki Memorial Lectures that I delivered at the John Paul II Catholic University of Lublin in early June. And what I'm doing is tried to drive the final nail into the Cartesian coffin, into the coffin of Descartes and all our tradition. All the Enlightenment institutions are collapsing, and this pandemic that the West has been experiencing, has been experienced globally, just precipitated the domino effect that was already happening, but it's not going to get better. It's going to get worse, and the only solution to it is to try to have in place a sound understanding of the nature of ourselves as human beings, and the relationship of education to perfecting human life, improving human happiness in all respects, and how that is crucially dependent upon transmitting wisdom and prudence from one generation to the next. If you cut off education from developing psychological habits of the human soul, if you lose your understanding that the human soul is the chief subject of human education, and it is so in relationship to habituation, in right understanding, in principles of prudence and justice, and courage and temperance, the cardinal moral virtues, as well as the intellectual moral virtues. You've lost higher education, and you can't recover it just by trying to come up with different organizations to replace the old ones, or just trying to somehow re-cement the foundations. The foundations are rotten. They're not going to come back.
Yeah, originally my training was in sociology, and when I saw it's just interesting that when I saw the map when COVID first came to this country, I think the cruise ship landed in Seattle, something like that. And it wasn't even like 3 days, and you could see that there were already red dots on the wrong side of Ohio, like closer to New England on the east.
Right.
I thought, this is not going to be good. And,
No.
it's not just the physical. People are so afraid of getting it and dying, but it's really having tremendous cultural impact. It's really
it is.
frightening.
It really is.
Right.
Psychologically, people are losing their sociability.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's really a terrible thing. That's they're turning into monads. This is the world of Leibniz, in a way. We have, they're living in their own little worlds where they think the only thing that they know are themselves. When in actuality, human beings are social animals, and you have to be involved with conversation with other people in order to achieve self-understanding.
Yeah.
To remain psychologically healthy.
Yeah, it's really a serious issue, and it's going to be for a while, I'm afraid.
Oh yes, yeah. These are the good old days.
I think the good old days may have been 2 years ago. Yeah. So, yeah. Just amazing what one little virus can do, isn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. It's, absolutely.
Yeah. Time will tell.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the reasons why I've been working on these different projects. I feel like I've been writing my Maimonides Guide for the Perplexed in several different versions.
Yeah. Yeah. Boy. Yeah. Well, it is something. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that has always struck me as evident, because in my neighborhood in Brooklyn, we always did things in organizations. Everybody, and it's normal. That's a normal Catholic thing. You work, you form teams. When you have a problem, right, and in order to resolve them, and you form, you divide, you form different divisions, within the teams, and where people cooperate. This is that I live within a providential order. It's evidently true to me. That I can't understand myself unless I specify myself in relationship to this some organizational whole. That's where we first get the notion of species from. We belong to some sort of organizational whole. We're all related to something we are becoming, and that means we're related to something that does not yet exist.
That's true. I like that.
How you can be related to something that does not yet exist, and unless you're related to something that exists outside of time and connects you to that, and moves you toward that, is incomprehensible to me. That's basically my first premise. Evident to me is that I existed within an organizational whole, which I call the universe or the universal order, the Weltanschauung. A lot of people have done different names for it, but it's only by placing myself, positioning myself within that wider, intelligible unity that I can make sense out of what I'm doing. Etienne Gilson put a tremendous amount of stress upon the fact that existence makes everything intelligible, and he talked about this. Became very popular in the 20th century, and I was a great fan of Gilson. I started a couple of organizations related to them, that have done more work to promote his work than I think anybody has done. But that doesn't help you understand science.
No.
To understand science, you have to understand the analogy of unity, and not total diversity, because you have to understand how things cannot be totally diverse and yet unified, and how they can how you can form unities that are not total unities, so much so that they destroy differences, but that somehow or other the unity lies in an inequality of difference that is cooperating as part of one organizational whole, and defining yourself in relationship to that. That's really where you have to start in order to come out of this anarchic type of psychology. That there's really a sick, a sociopathic psychology that has dominated the West over the past several centuries, and it's coming to a head, and people are starting to realize it, and they want to head in the right direction to get out of it. And you can't get out of it if you think that the only thing that you know are your own feelings. You're an anarchist. You have no principles.
Oh boy.
So you can't form a group of anarchists that is somehow going to solve world problems. That's like Professor Hancock says. That's like asking incendiaries to help you put out a forest fire.
Oh my. Yeah.
You have to get out of that disordered psychological. So it's really a moral and metaphysical problem, the one that politicians can never solve.
Oh God!
You have to change your psychology toward the world, and I recommend that people recognize that philosophy and science are identical, and that both are wondering about different organizational wholes and the way they behave. And once you do that, you can reintroduce into science a multitude of disciplines that have been rejected and displaced by the fiction that the whole of science lies in positivistic mathematical physics. That's indefensible. It's intellectually indefensible, and psychologically, it's destroying the culture. You get away. If you're having trouble solving problems, it's because, as Aristotle says, the first principles. You have to take a look at your first principles to find out really where the problem lies. That to the extent that you start an investigation and you're starting with the wrong principles, that's going to multiply down the road, and you can't. Your ultimate. It's like being a baseball player who's in a slump, and there's something wrong with the mechanics of your swing. You just can't solve it just by doing the same sort of things that you've been doing. You have to have somebody or yourself eventually point out to you precisely what those small, Aristotle says, small mistakes in the beginning, right, which are first principles. When you repeat them over and over again, they'll eventually multiply 1,000-fold.
Yeah.
Which is our current situation.
Mm-hmm. Well, this has certainly been a cheerful conversation.
Well, it is cheerful because I think I really think that in the book, How to Listen and How to Speak, I've got the solutions to how to get out of it. Especially the last chapter in the book, which is entitled, let's see, Common sense, the personal meeting point in and through which providence first touches an animal's soul, is that of a human person. Human beings have to rediscover the understanding of ourselves as animals. And with having animal souls, St. Thomas locates the specific difference of a human being in the animal part of the soul. Animal rationality, which lies in a kind of estimative intelligence, that ability in the individual situation to be able to see the right principles to use, to apply, to solve, to answer problems about which you're wondering. That's what gets you back in touch with reality, estimative intelligence.
Yeah.
As Gilson says, sensing with your intellect and intellectualizing with your senses.
It's an interesting proposition. I think you are probably right. I just hope you have enough time to dispense that information to enough people so that things change.
Well, luckily, we have Eduardo Bernot at Holy Apostles Seminary. Right?
Yeah, he's very nice. I like him.
Who's absolutely brilliant. Right?
He is. Smart man.
And you also had, before Bernot, you had Richard Garrity over there, who was a good friend of mine, and Roger Duncan, who you've had a lot of great people with common sense in the past over there, and you've a terrific program. And Eduardo has mastered the understanding of what I'm doing much better than I understand it, and it's already he and a bunch of other students that I've had. So I'm just finishing off some touches before the Lord calls me home, and hopefully to the right location.
Yeah, really. Yeah. Roger Duncan is still here. He teaches one undergraduate and one graduate course a semester.
Oh, well, say hello to Roger. He is one brilliant guy.
Oh, I know. First, a student here, I took a course with him, and I was sitting there thinking, I wonder what he's talking about. That was like 30 years ago. It's like his low forest, too. Yeah, he is brilliant. But I will, I tell him to talk to you.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I really want to thank you for this interview. I've got to say it's been one of the more interesting and more lively ones that I've had.
Well, good. I'm glad to hear that.
You're very informative.
Good.
Good.
Well, I hope it sounded that way to the listeners too.
Oh, I'm
going to hear it.
Yeah, you have the gift of being able to communicate.
Oh, well, thanks. Sometimes.
But no, you really communicate well. Your logic is easy to follow. It's a lot of times people who are extremely educated, although there's no question they know what they're talking about, it's very difficult to understand what they're saying. I was just following along, and I'm thinking, wow, you're a good communicator, and you've got something important to communicate. That's a good combination.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Praise from Caesar is praise indeed.
Anyway, if you come up and write anything else, let me know, and we'll do this again.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. So let me close in a prayer. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Well, again, thank you very much. And
thank you.
Hope to talk soon. Yeah. Okay.
God bless you.
Thank you. You too. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
The mission of Holy Apostles College and Seminary is to form faithful witnesses of Christ. Year after year, the prestigious Newman Guide has recommended Holy Apostles for our academic excellence and steadfast fidelity to the magisterial teachings of the Catholic Church. We are also fully accredited and the leader in Catholic online learning. Our students enjoy the unsurpassed flexibility to study on their own time and anywhere in the world through asynchronous engagement. Holy Apostles is dedicated to the relentless pursuit of truth, which allows students in all academic programs, including undergraduate, graduate, and personal interest, to formulate a coherent worldview based on both faith and reason. The study of the liberal arts also develops and refines key competencies associated with career readiness, such as critical thinking and problem solving, clear communication, collaboration, and a strong work ethic. The tuition rate at Holy Apostles is one of the most affordable in the country. Yearly tuition for a full-time undergraduate is under $12,000. Students at Holy Apostles can graduate with minimal or even no college debt, which enables them to live out their calling as faithful witnesses of Christ without heavy financial burdens holding them back. Please visit www.holyapostles.edu/admissions for more information. The fall 2021 admissions deadline is Friday, July 23rd. Classes start Monday, August 30th. See you soon.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.